Hello and welcome to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast, Series 3. Last year, we spoke to SDRs, BDRs, and people earlier on in their sales careers about their journeys, tips, and why people should get into the industry. This year, we'll be speaking with sales and business leaders about their journeys, how they've made their success, and their insights into sales as an industry, especially what needs to be done to change the perception of sales. I'm Lizzie.
I'm Kyle, and still for far too long, people have just been falling into sales. Through this podcast, and by having conversations with industry leaders, we're looking to continue to change the perception of sales and make it a career of choice.
On this episode, we're joined by Zandra Moore, the CEO of Panintelligence, which is an embedded data analytics platform for SaaS businesses. Zandra is also the founder of No Code Lab and the gender equality network Lean In Leeds. We'll talk about Zandra's impressive sales career and why she didn't just fall into the industry, rather chose to be in it, as well as her journey to becoming a CEO. She also talks to us about the importance of gender equality in sales, how role models influence us, and how her dyslexia is actually her sales superpower. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to this episode of the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast. And today I have the absolute pleasure to say we are joined by Zandra Moore. Zandra, thank you very much for joining us.
An absolute pleasure. My favourite subject, sales. Thank you.
Good. Well, that's exactly what we like to hear. And look, just to kick things off before we kind of go into the conversation, please introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about who you are.
Thank you. So, I'm Zandra Moore, the CEO and founder of a data analytics software business here in the beautiful north of England in Leeds. We are a high growth business. We raised Series A money in 2019, just closed a bridge round recently, and we sell our software, which is basically machine learning and embedded analytics into software vendors globally. So we have customers all over the world. So that's me.
Amazing. Thank you, Zandra. We've picked probably one day of recording where it's actually not snowing up north, but down south we're having an absolute nightmare. It's probably the one day of the year that would happen. But no, really excited for this one today. And I think there's a lot of things that we're going to unpack. But as we always like to start on this particular series of the podcast when speaking to leaders is at the very beginning. So taking you back, how and why did you get into sales, Zandra, in the very first place?
It's an easy question for me to answer, and it's not always the same for most salespeople. In my experience, most people say, "I sort of fell into it." Mine was very intentional. So I was fortunate to have this amazing role model at home in my mum, a very successful saleswoman in tech, only finding that career once we'd gone to secondary school, actually. She started a job for Digital Equipment Corporation, so probably the first businesses that were selling servers into businesses, if that makes sense, desktop computing. So she started as sales admin and worked her way up to being a regional sales leader. Then she went to work for the first internet service provider in the north of England, Planet Online, selling the information superhighway, as it was back then, to people like the big banks to get their first websites up and running. And then she went on to sell things like advanced infrastructure provision, which we all call the cloud today, which is kind of off-site hosting of. So my mum has been an incredible role model. Brilliant saleswoman, and I kind of left home and just wanted to be my mum, if I'm being honest with you. So what was not to love? And I just saw her grow in confidence, her passion for both her profession, her passion for the sector, just the amount she got to travel and meet lots of new people and learn about lots of new things through sales was really inspirational. So.
Nice, good. And I completely agree with what you said at the beginning there, that for many people, the answer is I fell into it or I just stumbled into sales. And we're really happy that actually it was the opposite for you, because that's what we want to be the case for more and more people we speak to. But interestingly, there's quite a lot of people we speak to that do or did have parents that work in sales, and they've actually encouraged them against it, or maybe that's made them realise, oh, I don't want to do that. What was it about your mum and her experiences that made you go, actually, that appeals to me rather than actually that puts me off?
So my mum was always herself. She never changed who she needed to be a saleswoman. So it was the fact that she was just herself, actually. She's very likeable, very honest, could make the complex simple. She didn't have to compromise on her to be in that profession. She also had no qualifications. She left school with no O-levels, and there wasn't as many, well, there aren't many professions where you can enter and earn a lot of money and be very successful if you haven't been successful academically. Now, I'm dyslexic. I found the academic pathway a bit of a challenge. I did leave school with qualifications, unlike my mum. But it is a profession where actually the people that aren't so good academically can be really good salespeople, because actually you need to have a very different mind, I think, for sales, which is often about connecting the disconnected and being really good in that kind of human side of relationships, which isn't always things that the academic kind of institutions value in the same way or sort of provide recognition or reward for. So you tend to find that later in life. So I think I could see a lot of myself in my mum, and partly that was it. I thought, well, if my mum can do it, so can I. So, and she was having a great time, so, so why not?
Yeah, cool. Love that. And really important subject. I know Lizzie's going to touch on, I guess, neurodiversity and probably a little bit more about role models later on. But you had your perception and your understanding from kind of what you've seen from your mum. What was your perception when going into sales of the industry as a whole?
Oh, Tina, that's a great question. So I started off working in quite a small business to start with, and we were a very small sales team. So you had the founders of the business and a sales manager and me, really. I was like one of their first sales hires that wasn't a sales manager. And I was literally given a Rolodex, I kid you not, a yellow pages and a desk phone, and told to get ringing and fill the Rolodex up. And then if I could book an appointment, I could then hire the company laptop to take out and do a demonstration of the product with my projector in tow. So it was very basic, right? And so my first experience of sales was, you really have to self-start, and that felt both frustrating, but at the same time is quite free, as in, well, it's mine to make happen my way. And I don't know, you can bring a lot to yourself to something when someone goes, just go for it, So at first I was a bit like, oh, this is organised chaos, but I like it. When I got into bigger organisations, some sales cultures, I experienced lots of other sales cultures through people that I knew as well. I think it's very male dominated. It's very white as well in this country. And I think there was a lot of sort of cultures where people were mirroring each other's behaviours, which created what I'd call quite could be quite hard culture for some people to get into. And I could see that. But my experience has been in the organisations I've worked for, the complete opposite. And maybe it's because I've chosen well or I've created my own culture based on what I believe is a good way to build teams. But I think the perception I hear from people around me is that they're all quite, competitive, laddie, a little bit, boozy, cultures and lots of banter and maybe quite hard places to work. And I think there is some of that out there, but it's not, I don't think it's the norm these days. I think it's changed a huge amount in my career anyway, and I come across it less and less and less. So but I still think we've got that hangover to get over in the industry, unfortunately. Yeah,
it's not just the case of it happening overnight, is it? But I'm really happy you've said what you said there, in that it has changed from your experience over the years, because I think there's a lot of people we speak to that choose not to go into sales because they think it's still like it maybe was 20 years ago. And as you said there, it has changed, certainly for the better. I always like asking this question, but I know you said you had your Rolodex and a phone and just kind of go and make it happen. Can you remember your first ever sale or meeting that you booked?
Oh, I've got some stinkers.
Go on, let's hear them.
Some stinkers. I was really chuffed that I'd got this meeting with they were a boiler manufacturer, and it was their HR department. I was selling HR software, and they were in Exeter, and we had a pool car that we could hire. We had the laptop that you could borrow, the pool car that you could borrow, and you had to get yourself there. And this was before TomToms. That's how old I am, unfortunately. And that was the first type of way we got around, right? Never mind Google Maps. So you literally had an A to Z on, I hate to say it, you held it on your steering wheel as you drove. And it took about 6 hours hours to drive to Exeter from Leeds. It was a long way, and got there, and it was something like 10 o'clock in the morning meeting. Hadn't stayed the night before because there was no budget for hotels, and the guy I was having a meeting with had rung in sick.
Oh, no.
And I turned up and sat down and was like, well, what do I do now? I've driven all this way. And literally it was one of my second meeting I'd booked, and I borrowed the cars, all the petrol. I was like thinking, oh God, my boss is going to kill me. You know, it's a long way to go. And got in there, set up anyway, and the team were like, well, you've come all this way, so we'll talk to you and you'll go through it. I thought, I can't. Brilliant. I was so nervous. I then knocked a glass of water on my laptop and blew my laptop up. So I learned a lot of lessons on that first one, which was about making sure you contact the person before you set off, or certainly get a hold of them before you make a long journey, and don't drink a glass of water next to your laptop. She says, just moving her laptop away from a glass of water. But I think you do, you know, but there was wonderful freedom in being able to kind of get on the road and go and meet new businesses and learn about different industries. God, one of the most interesting things in my job is every company I go in and speak to, they're doing different things. It's fascinating. You learn so much about how the world works and how things are produced or manufactured or made, or how people behave. It's you learn all the time in sales. So yeah, sometimes you can have some stinkers like that one, but you know, there's a lot of things I never did again on the back of that one.
God, I absolutely love that. I think everyone in sales has got a story like that. I don't think it was probably travelling as far to Exeter for that to happen. It might have just been in the same city, Exeter. That's like really, really extreme. But I think everyone's got that. And like you said, it's about failing fast and learning quick, isn't it? And learning from the mistakes, and things like that have to happen for you to know, you know, what to do and what not to do in the future. So I think it's a really, really good story to share. And we spoke about it briefly before then. You talked about the Rolodex, and I love the idea of renting out laptops by that. It's like going back to school days for me as well. But how has sales, in your opinion, changed throughout kind of your journey and the time you've been in it?
Hugely. I mean, we didn't have laptops when I started in sales. Nobody had their own computer. I look at my sales team today and the amount of tools that we had. I mean, LinkedIn didn't exist when I started in my career. There was no social media when I started in my career. I remember when I set up my first business, and LinkedIn was quite new at the time, and just thinking, oh my God, this is like the Yellow Pages on steroids. This is amazing. And not only can I find these people, I can see where they worked, where they went to school before. I've got all this information to start a conversation, to really engage with them, to get them talking to me. So I thought LinkedIn was just this magic thing from a sales point of view. And that has evolved to become a whole industry of, you know, Zoom and the online tools for meeting people, so you don't have to drive for 6 hours and spill water on your own laptop and turn around and come home again, right? The fact that you can just have back-to-back meetings with prospects, and that time efficiency is awesome, and the ability to speak to a lot more people and more frequently to build those relationships is powerful. But then I look at other tools like the sales optimization tools for funnel, and what you can do with LinkedIn Plus, you know, all the other tools that wrap around that for, we use things like Zoom Info for looking at intent data to be able to, you know, wow, you can find people that are looking for what you do, as opposed to just dialing every person in the Yellow Pages and hoping that they answer the phone and that they may or may not have a need for what you do. So find, you know, intent data, having this information about people at your fingertips, and then all of these brilliant automation tools for communication and CRM systems. So the technology that supported our profession is making it just so much more enjoyable, because you can spend more of your time having those quality conversations and less of your time just trying to get to the quality conversation. And so for me, you know, when I look at the ratio of what I used to do, I would spend probably 2/3 of my time just trying to get hold of somebody that might want to have a conversation about buying a product. Now I spend most of my time having great conversations with people that have a need, and I'm navigating them through to that solution. So you're a partner in a conversation of solving a problem, which is a much better place than feeling like you're pestering people, which I think maybe the sales profession has had a reputation for in the past.
Yeah, vertical, it's completely changed, hasn't it? So much with the amount of tools, like intent data, like you've said, like you can literally see when someone's in the market for your particular product. It's
Magic.
amazing.
It's magic.
This might be a bit controversial, though. We've all we speak with people about this a lot. There's so much at your disposal now, almost too much. Like, how do you know what you do need, what you don't need? Sometimes you can have too many tools. Do you think there's maybe a case that some salespeople or sales team may have got a little bit complacent with everything that's at the disposal now?
Good question. Have they got complacent? Let me give you an example. There are some tools that LinkedIn doesn't like that we may or may not use. And they may or may not have a detrimental impact on your LinkedIn profile if you use them. So I think there is perhaps a desire in sales to pick up the next thing and have a go at it, because we're all so desperate to kind of keep driving that pipeline and finding new ways to drive that pipeline. So maybe we're not always as good at doing due diligence on these things as maybe we should do, I would say. I think once we've started using something in sales and got value from it, we're the biggest salespeople, we're the easiest people to sell to, right? I only need to go and have a pint or a drink with somebody that's also in sales. Have you used it? No, I haven't heard of that one. Oh my God, and 24 hours later I've spun it up and I'm giving it to my sales team. Before I know it, we're all using it. So, we do tend to pick things up very quickly. We're easy to sell to. Complacent, I don't know. Are we complacent? I think we're likely to start a lot of things. Are we starters? Yes. Are all salespeople finishers? I'd say a lot of salespeople are starters. We like to open doors. We like to ignite conversations. We like to solve problems. So yeah, I think you do need a safe pair of hands around sales, just questioning, are you still using that tool and what value you're driving from it? I have a COO like that. She's amazing. And she just keeps me in check and goes, are you using those things? I go, oh, I think so.
I have to check.
I have to check. But there is a lot of tools. But I would say the weight of value is much greater than the cost. And the cost of these tools is coming down all the time as well, which is great.
Yeah. Well, the more and more that come out, the
More
cost is decreasing. And yeah, exactly. But I think it's kind of getting a balance as well. As like you mentioned then, when you have the Rolodex and you just have to make things happen. I think if you can still have a bit of that mentality now with the tools that you have at your disposal, that's probably making for a winning salesperson, whereas maybe some out there that are getting complacent in the way that are just relying on the tools they've got to the disposal. So it's an interesting point. What would be good to move on to now is, I guess, your journey in sales from initially where you started, which you've spoken about, to becoming a CEO. And a CEO, let's be honest, is a title, a status that people that go into sales will aspire to get to, and you're there. So before we kind of go into that in a little bit more detail, please just share, I guess, your journey from starting in sales to CEO.
Okay. I'm still a saleswoman. So I think the first thing I'd like to say is I will always be a saleswoman. I may not always be a CEO, but I will always be a saleswoman. I'm a saleswoman first. And actually, my journey to CEO wasn't my intended pathway. I'd never intended to become a CEO. I'd intended to be a founder and a shareholder and an owner in a business. I'd always wanted to have my own business, but I'd always envisaged that would be alongside others, with other people, because I'm a saleswoman at heart. And I've got a co-founder who's the CTO. He's the technical guy. And one of the founders that's since retired, he was the kind of finance guy, if I put it really bluntly and oversimplify it, sales guy, finance guy, technical guy, although I'm a gal. When our finance, our FD retired from the business, there was an obvious space for me to move into, and I'd not really fully considered what the job of a CEO was. The opportunity opened up, and he felt very strongly that I would be great at it, as did the board. And I was like, great. And then I learned on the job, like we all do. So, I didn't sort of go, I'm going to set out to be a CEO. But I must admit, having become a CEO and having been a CEO for the last nearly 5 years now, I've learned the role, as most salespeople do, on the job. And it's really, really valuable having come from a sales background. Like, it's super valuable. In fact, I read a book called Apologetically ambitious, which I may have mentioned before.
Yeah.
And there's an amazing woman in that book who talks about her journey, and she said that she thinks that salespeople or people with commercial backgrounds, sales backgrounds, make the best CEOs. Because we've had such a broad exposure of industries and businesses, and we've often operated at a C-suite level, and conversed with and persuaded and managed stakeholders at that level through our career, because often those are the buyers of often a lot of the things that we are working with, especially for enterprise salespeople, that we've already got the language and the ability to communicate. An awful lot being a CEO is around communication, stakeholder management. So my journey was perhaps a little accidental. But actually, I still feel more of a saleswoman than I do a CEO. And most of my day-to-day is still quite heavily focused on helping our teams win and retain customers, which is still what I've done for most of my career. And yes, I fundraise, and yes, I deal with other things. But it's a big, big part of the role. And I think it's a fantastic pathway. Actually, if people are looking for what next from sales, where can this take me? I think, CEO as a role, if that's something you're looking to, it really does lend itself to a sales background. I didn't know that, but I do now.
Just found out, wasn't it?
I just sort of found out a bit, really. But I think it's really helped me. It's helped me to be successful as a CEO, definitely. Yep.
Yeah. Amazing. That's good to know. What a, I guess, advocation for sales as a career, and the fact that skill and the experience you had has really helped in the role itself. And this, Zandra, might seem like a really simple question, but I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the listeners, people early on in their sales careers. They may have aspirations to become a CEO, but actually there's probably not many people that really know the day-to-day of what a CEO does. And I know it changes a lot, but just to really share and help people understand, what's been really different about the role as a CEO as it was, sales leader, for example.
That's a good question. So I'm still working that one out. 5 years in. Look, there's some very similar things, which is the stakeholder stuff. You constantly context switching between different peoples at different levels. Just as a salesperson, context switches from one prospect to another prospect at different stages of their journey. I think as salespeople, we're really good at context switching because we're used to dealing with lots of different people with lots of different problems, lots of different companies, lots of different levels of people at different stages along a cycle. And because of that, I think the CEO role is very similar. So a lot of context switching. So you might go from an internal HR conversation to speaking to an investor, to speaking to somebody like you, wonderful guys on a podcast, to the next conversation will be helping a salesperson put a proposal together. So a CEO's role is being very comfortable in that context switching and being very present in those moments with what's in front of you and focusing on that. You've got to have an eye on the future because you've got to be able to do strategy and planning, but you've also got to be very present for everybody because ultimately you are the chief officer of the company, so you need to try and be across as much of it as you can be, or as well informed as you can be, which means you've got to give enough time to all of those different stakeholders to be close enough to be able to make good decisions. It's like the same as your pipeline. You've got to be across your pipeline well enough so that you can actually influence that sale. It's just one level up, really. So I wouldn't say it's radically different. It really isn't. I just think there's just a few more contexts. That's all. There's a few more contexts, yeah.
So for anyone listening, it's basically doing what you would do as a sales leader, very senior sales leader, but across every single different department of the business and then bringing that all together.
Yeah, but you're not managing everybody, which is great because that would be a real headache. So you've got managers to help you with that bit, thankfully.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
for you. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I think a lot of people always have CEO, but then when we ask a lot of people why or what does that look like, they probably don't really know. So it's good to get that insight. Just something you mentioned earlier on when talking about the journey to CEO, I want to touch on a little bit. It's quite an interesting topic. You said you always wanted to start your own business. Where did that kind of motivation or interest come from?
So my mum never had a piece of the pie. She made everyone very rich, really, that she worked with. She never needed to ask for a piece of the pie. It wasn't a conversation. She'd never had a family where people had ever been entrepreneurs or shareholders. So the idea of saying, well, I want some shares before I do that, would have never even occurred to her. It wasn't until the businesses that she was involved with became very successful. She was very early in the sort of IT industry here in Leeds, and saw some businesses go from absolutely nothing to huge organisations, and some very, very exciting exits for those founders that she'd worked alongside from those very early stages. And it wasn't really until the exit she was like, oh, okay, maybe I should have asked for something. So one of her lessons to me was, make sure you have a piece of the pie. If you're going to help somebody else grow a business, or if you're going to be part of growing a business, then make sure you have part of that. So I think she helped me to sort of see that was something I should expect for myself and ask for. So that's kind of where it comes from, really. And also the tech sector, there's quite a lot of opportunity to start something and build something in a relatively, a decent amount of time, and realise some value for yourself and others. That's quite achievable in technology. It isn't in all sectors. Certain industries are such a capitally intensive startup cost that you would have to have means beyond yourself to be able to do that. But we were able to sort of get going and build something out and take a marginal amount of risk, which you can't do in every industry. So it felt achievable that I could start a business, build a business, and in the sector that I'm in. But I appreciate it's not the same for every sector.
Yeah. No, really, really sound advice there. And just one thing on that, and this is something we've spoken about internally and with some of our clients as well, is when looking to hire salespeople, them being entrepreneurial, sales is often a trait that's kind of sought after and looked for. And when we speak to a lot of candidates, they say, in the future, I want to run my own business. As a CEO, someone that interviews salespeople, if someone was to say in an interview one of their future ambitions was to set up their own company, would that be seen as something that's a positive for you, or something that maybe could be a bit of a reservation?
Ever a reservation. You want your salespeople to be ambitious. Running your own business takes a lot of grit, resilience. Do you know what? The sales profession could be quite a lone wolf profession, and being a CEO is a lonely place. So you get used to sort of having to operate, and it sits on your shoulders as a sales leader. And as a salesperson, you've got this number, and it sits on your back every month, and you get rid of that number, and the next month you got another number. So you're used to carrying the pressure of delivering results, and you're used to carrying that pressure on your own. And you're used to being a bit of a lone wolf sometimes, because the book kind of does stop with you. It's your number, you own it. That's no different really for a CEO. And therefore, if somebody's got an ambition to be a founder or run their own business, then that probably is quite a good sign that they're able to operate that way and be able to take that responsibility on the back. And especially if you're looking for a new salesperson that perhaps hasn't worked in sales before. So I think that's quite a good sign. There's lots of things I look for in salespeople. I would say that one of my favourite things to look for, I love a rough diamond. I really love the unpolished, the people that just have, you can see it in their eyes and you can hear it in their words and you can feel it in their presence, that they're just going to hustle and work hard because they want it. They really, really want it. You can teach them the rest. That wanting it, that fight, that grit, that resourcefulness, that push through adversity, that is, you can't teach people. You've kind of got it or you haven't. So you can have very polished people that say all the right things, but when you need them to dig in when it gets hard, they struggle. I look for the digging when it gets hard first, and then we can apply the polish later. So,
yeah, a lot of people look for that actually. That's probably the thing that's harder to train, isn't it? That overcome adversity, the resilience, everything else. Whereas communication, to a certain extent, other things can very much be trained. But I kind of really agree with what you said there, because a lot of business leaders would maybe miss out or not hire really ambitious, good people because they may fear they'll leave, in 2 years to set up their own business, or 3 years. And obviously it's all subjective, there's nuances, and, you've got to take it case by case. But I'm with you, if someone's got that ambition, think about what they could do in that 3-4 years that they're with you anyway. So I'm glad that was your kind of stance on that point. Um, One thing you mentioned within that, and just a couple more things on the life of a CEO now, is you mentioned it can be a bit of a lonely place, and I kind of wanted to talk about the challenges, but that specifically, how do you kind of deal and manage with that? Because I think it's important for anyone that is aspiring to get into that role.
I think a lot of leadership roles are lonely places because the further you get up a tree, I suppose, there's less people alongside you.
Yeah.
And you're more exposed, right? You have more responsibilities and you're much more visible as well. So there's a vulnerability to that, and that creates there's less and less people you can lean on, and so I think that's the truth. When you're a CEO, you're sort of at the top of the tree, so to speak, but you do have a board of directors, and you should be able to lean into that board of directors and get that support from them, or a chairman if you're a business that's perhaps got funding like we have. So there are people that you should be able to lean on and can lean on. How I deal with it, as a female CEO, I'm like rocking horse shit, especially in tech. So I like to gather sorry for swearing.
It's fine.
I do like to gather other rocking horses. And that's great for me. I mean, it's not for everyone. I have a diverse group of peers, but I do like to find other women in sort of leadership and tech roles. And I think there's a shared common ground really around our experiences as women that perhaps others don't have, which is just being honest. Frankly, it is. I think it's important to say that. So I've gathered up other people that do the similar sort of job to me in a similar sector, and that's my peer group. And we have WhatsApp groups where we have a good rant at each other, or we'll get together and have a glass of wine and moan about our staff occasionally, or moan about customers, because you need these places where you can just talk and it's a safe space, and not worry about the implications, or just sound out and have genuine conversations around problems and have you got any idea of how you might deal with this. That works really, really well for me, having that peer group that's a safe space. But I've also got a great co-founder and exec director team. They're awesome. They're brilliant support, really, really great support. But yeah, that's how I deal with it.
Yeah. Well, good. I think I've seen, and we'll come on to the show, I've seen a lot of the stuff you do with other groups, and having industry peers that you can lean on and share insight and ideas and just vent to as well, I think is really important to have that safe space, as you mentioned. Prior to this, you mentioned in the kind of prep call that we did, you talked about doing things, though people should do things that scare them. What's the scariest thing you've ever done, Zandra?
Oh, good question.
Putting you on the spot there.
The scariest thing I've ever done. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but becoming a parent, definitely. It's pretty terrifying. God, you bring the baby home and you're like going, "Am I trusting me with a child?" So that was pretty terrifying, the first night with my firstborn. But no, in a career-wise, it was making the decision to set this business up that I'm in now and buy the IP and empty the bank account and, genuinely go, right, I've been talking about doing this. Now times the rubber hits the road, right? You're going to empty the bank account, you're going to buy this IP with your co-founder, and you're going to set up a company and run it, and it's going to be a tech company. And this thing that you have wanted to do, you're going to do. And just being confident enough to go, I can do this. Because it feels like a big risk at the time. So that was pretty scary. And I would say after that, setting up a football team, and I'd never played football before, with my daughter. That was, I don't know if that was scary or stupid, but anyway, we've been running it for 6 years. They're 17 now, so this is the last year that we've had them, unfortunately. But having never played football, coaching football and learning how to coach football, I just thought I must be an absolute idiot. But it was one of the best things I've ever done. And that's the thing. You can look at something and go, I can't do that, or I've never done that. So you tell yourself this narrative that I'm not a sports person, which I told myself because I hadn't. I'm now obsessed with football. I am literally glued to the World Cup. Watch the Women's World Cup was just the next level of brilliant. I've been coaching football for 6 years. I am so passionate about the game. I'm not that great at it, but I love it. And I think sometimes you can look at things and say that's not for me, or I'm afraid of that. And actually, it's only until you start doing something can you learn whether or not A, you can do it, B, you're going to enjoy it, C, maybe there's an internal narrative that's not helping you, that's stopping you from perhaps taking that next step. So sometimes you have to lean into your, fear. What is it? Growth begins at the edge of your comfort zone, I believe. Absolutely. Growth begins at the edge of your comfort zone. Shy Burns, get out there. Ask, don't be afraid to ask and try new things. And if it's not scaring you a little bit, then it's probably, you're probably a bit comfortable, frankly. So, I'm all for, but I wouldn't say some of the things I've chosen to do have been entirely rational. I've been a bit like, oh, sod it, I'll just give it a go.
Some of the best things aren't always the most rational. But I love what you said there, that growth begins at the edge of your comfort zone. I think that's something we'll definitely have to snip it to share after this episode. I think that's a really good quote. And just lastly for me on the CEO journey, before Lizzie comes in on a couple of other important topics, but you kind of touched on it then, but not only are you a CEO, you're a saleswoman, sales leader, you're a parent, manage a football team, give up a lot of time volunteering. I saw you even on the road a lot, and you were at Buckingham Palace a few weeks ago as well. How do you do it?
That was random. I mean, one of my really good rocking horses that the felling rocking horse shit, Anna Sutton, who runs the CEO of Data Shed, which is a data analytics software business here in Leeds, who I met only 5 years ago, and ironically we went to the same school and lived 2 streets away from each other and only met 5 years ago. Talk about small world. She got the invite on the same day as me, and we're like, oh my god, we're going to see the king. We had no idea who had put us forward, so that was wonderful. Yeah, we were invited as part of in recognition of small businesses' contributions to the economy. It was a fabulous thing to do. Yeah, I run Lean In Leeds, which is a network of over 1,000 women. I do have help with that. I've got a steering group of amazing women that help me run that. And I run a network called No Code Lab as well, which is it's all about kind of helping increase the diversity of the digital skills pipeline, because we have a shortage of digital talent in the UK. So if we're going to drive the tech sector, we need more digital talent, and we need to introduce people that don't necessarily understand that tech is for them through different things, and we do that through No Code Lab. So how do I do all of that? You find time for the things you love. You do. You just do. You just find the time and the capacity for the things that you love. And I genuinely am fortunate that because I had such a good role model as a young woman, I found what I loved very quickly: sales, technology, very passionate about the gender agenda and trying to increase the number of female leaders there are, number of women that there are in tech. That's been with me from a very young age. So I'm just getting to do the things that I really want to do, and I just find the energy for that. And I've got a very supportive husband. He's an entrepreneur. He's got a couple of businesses, 3 businesses. Sorry, you won't thank me for that. And 2 teenage kids, and we make it work. We do make it work. You always do find a way. It's amazing how much time you can find when you really need to. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess on that then, really want to come on to the piece on diversity and inclusion, as we can clearly see from here. I know it's something you're hugely passionate about, not being afraid to shout loud, be really vocal about issues that are important to you, and obviously make time for the things that you love as well. So yeah, definitely want to talk about that. And obviously you mentioned just there Lean In Leeds, which is something that obviously we've been looking at. You founded it. So I mean, actually talk us through what that actually is and what made you want to launch it in the first place.
Well, I'd just become the CEO, and my FD had sort of said, oh, you can do this. And I was like, oh, can I? So she said, read this book, which was a book by Sheryl Sandberg called Lean In. She's the COO of Facebook, or was. I'm not sure if she still is anymore. And it's a great book. It's all about helping women to understand the challenge for women in leadership, but also understand the ways in which they can help themselves to lean into that challenge and be the success they want to be, right? And then at the end of the book it says, join a circle near you, because it's Facebook. Of course, they had a social platform, and there wasn't one, so I set one up. And then first there was 20 people, and then it just grew and grew and grew. There's like 1,100 now in the largest group outside of London, one of the largest networks in the world. And the reason it grew so quickly wasn't because we marketed it, promoted it. It's all word of mouth. And the need I had, which was to find other people like me so that I could have a peer group I could trust, lean in and talk to, and have safe spaces to kind of go, does this happen to you, and how would you deal with that, and have you ever had this problem, and how would you solve it, was the same for an awful lot of other women who were working in perhaps male-dominated sectors, in manufacturing, in the finance sector, in the legal sector, of which Leeds has a very large financial and legal sector, actually, as well as a tech sector. So we had 3 very male-dominated sectors in Leeds, where there's a lot of women in those industries, where they were one in a very large team, or one of a few women in a very large team. So it enabled us to create safe spaces for us to have those kind of, and it wasn't, people go, you're just talking about men. Like, we're not. We actually don't talk about men at all. And actually we have men that attend. It's not like it's women. I mean, gosh, people say, are you bra burning? I mean, people do still ask that question. But the truth is, it isn't. It's a mixed room of people that want to talk about how do we get more women into leadership? How do we help sort of change the diversity of our organisations and our teams with a specific focus on gender. It is about the gender agenda. Diversity is a big subject, but Lean In's about the gender agenda. But like I say, there's men in the room who are as interested in trying to drive that change as the women are, and want to listen to and want to participate in the conversations around that. So that's been going for 7 years now. And we do 2 events a month. Yeah, we do that. And then the other thing I'm involved in is the task force, the government task force for, so it's a women-led high-growth task force. So it's to try and accelerate the number of women growing high-growth companies in the UK, because only 1% of all funding, that's equity or capital funding, goes into female founding teams of all the capital. And in the north of England, it's 0.1%. It's very tiny proportion. So we've got a huge gap between, and yet 34% of all companies are started by women. So there's a big gap between businesses, between those founders that are women and the funding that goes into that. And there's lots of reasons for that. And we can maybe chat about that in a bit more detail, if that's what you want to do, Lizzie.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's incredible. Like, I suppose both ventures that you've got there, and obviously it's so aligned as well to what we're trying to do here at changing the perception of sales. You mentioned earlier a massive perception of sales, which isn't actually necessarily the case all the time, is that it is very male dominated. There aren't enough female leaders in the industry, and they need to be promoted. And the fact that you've obviously got networks, peer groups, you're hosting events for people to have an open conversation about that is massive. And particularly for people like me, a female in the industry, is something that I probably wish I knew a little bit more of before I maybe started out.
Come and join us, lady. Come and join us, Leslie.
I know you've done a really good sales pitch on me there, to be fair. But out of interest, though, obviously you mentioned you do two events a month, actually. I'm not sure about how much you can disclose, but what kind of things do you talk about, or what kind of events do you typically host?
Oh, gosh, we've done so many different. So we have, everything from imposter syndrome, which you hear talked about a lot. It's a very common subject. Art of communication, doing different conversations. We'll have stories from female leaders, just them talking about their personal story, the things they've overcome. Often the personal stories are really important. We had setting your, objectives for 2023 as like an objective setting and personal and business growth kind of workshop. I mean, it's broad range, it really is, and we sort of take a feed from our members as to what it is they would like to focus on. We've had there was a happiness workshop, and there was, we do all sorts, really. It's incredible that the range of subjects. The most popular thing we do is we run a mentoring program where we actually match women to each other to have a co-mentoring relationship. So it's not like a mentor or mentee, it's quite co-mentoring. And they submit an application, and we've matched 450 women to each other, and they're now in mentoring pairs. We give them a bit of help on how to do that, but then we let them go off. But you're kind of creating these connections between women to have those relationships with each other, so they've got a safe sounding board of somebody that perhaps is outside of their family, outside of their business, outside their immediate network, which is just somebody for them, without having to necessarily pay for a coach or something like that, because not everybody can afford to pay for that kind of support. So actually you can just having a safe sort of conversation with somebody that is outside of all of those circles can be super valuable. So that's probably the most value driving thing we've done out of everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the co-mentorship is something, it almost links to what you said earlier about role models. And actually, I've seen, like, just from following your LinkedIn and everything, you share quite a lot about the importance of these female networks, these peer groups, especially the importance that they play in sort of shifting company cultures and promoting equality. And the role model piece, or the co-mentorship piece, it seems that it's playing a massive, massive part on in allowing that for that communication, letting people speak up. And actually, just to kind of bring it back to something you discussed with Kyle earlier, though, you mentioned obviously, a huge role model in your life being your mother. She was obviously a saleswoman. Out of interest, though, and particularly through your journey in sales, how did she particularly inspire you? Like, what typical lessons do you think you've taken from her that have made you successful?
Oh, so some of her favourite sayings that I've definitely adopted. Shy burns getting out, good old Yorkshire or Northern saying, that one, which is, if you don't know, if you don't ask, basically, it's the short of that. Shorthand, non-Northern version. So, I just think, and also this idea that, just because someone's got a job title that can seem scary, they're just people. Right? My mum always said, they're just a person. They're just a person, and trying to remove that kind of fear of these sort of levels or perceived levels and hierarchies. So shy bones getting out. Another one, givers gain. So givers gain is a really big one for me, as in the networking organisations that I've set up. And you mentioned before about how do you do all these things. I do them because it's not just a one-way street. You can find the time for the things you love, but those things also give back to you. So it's not completely altruistic. Let me be really clear here. It's not like I'm doing this just for the love of it. There is some value back to me. So building these networks, they're my customers, they're my suppliers, they become my staff pipeline. These networks bring me a lot of value back. They help me to build other relationships which drive value in the businesses that I run, and not just because I would like to see more women be successful. Yes, I would. And I would really like to see more female leaders. And I really would like to see more women take in sales leadership roles and be in sales, because we need more women in sales. We really, really do. But actually, it gives so much back. So the giver's gain mentality is the more you give to something you love, the more it will pay you back. Just don't expect it straight away. It's a long game, is the kind of getting involved in networking and building peer groups and building those wider relationships. But if you do that doing something you love, that's when it will just flow. So make sure you're not just going to the BNIs and don't go to these networking events just to kind of push a card around and do sales. Get involved in networks where you can be passionate about what the network's agenda is, or that's where you'll build the relationships that will pay back in the long term. Would be the thing that I think my mum really helped me to understand the value of. There's lots I learned from my mum. Still do. I still do.
Oh, absolutely, I can imagine. Definitely, and actually, just wanted to take a quote from an article I read actually just prior to this podcast, and it references your mother actually. So you said, and this is kind of in reference to the peer groups as well. You talked about, when I see in my peer group women holding themselves back, I really, really want to help. My male peers are more likely to have a go, whereas women generally don't tend to put themselves forward unless they know how to do something. I grew up thinking differently because my mum was never afraid. She never had anything to lose. And that's obviously a massive, obviously really aligns with some of the things that you've just been talking about there. Out of interest though, why do you reckon maybe women do hold themselves back as opposed to maybe their male counterparts?
It's a big question, that one, Lizzie, and it's all, there is so many layers to that. It's as you start to peel the layers back, you go, wow, this is systemic. And, I don't know, I have kids that are teenagers, but even now I will go, I was in a supermarket this weekend looking at those gifts you put in a Secret Santa kind of stocking filler. And, even just looking at the shelf, and you have, all the girls' stuff is fairies and princesses and pink, and all the boys' stuff is, superheroes, and, they're all got swords or axes or something, We've still got some really hardwired kind of social stereotypes, which kids pick up from a very, very, very young age, and also as adults we inadvertently and unintentionally project onto both our children but also our friends and our peers those stereotypes, and we don't even realise we're doing it because it's just such a part of our culture and such a part of our society. So I think it's complicated, and it's quite deep actually, and probably a little bit too much for my not very smart brain to program. But what I do know is that it's mostly unintended. Women don't intend to hold themselves back, and they don't often realise they are. And I don't think men intentionally try and hold women back. most of the time. It's just they've been programmed to be the hero at any cost, and therefore they don't worry about failing as much, because the prize is bigger than the fear, if that makes sense. Whereas I think women are there's more programming to get things right, do things right, and I don't. There's, like I said, I'm not going to try and psychoanalyse it all here, but I think there is a lot of society programming that is hard. But I think it's recognising that as a woman, and that actually you too can have that same mindset to want more for yourself and push yourself through some of those fears that maybe are holding you back. And most of the work we do at Lean In is actually working on self, and not trying to fix the system, because the system's too big and too complicated to fix. But if you can work on yourself and your own kind of mindset around risk and fear and capability and imposter syndrome, if you can remove some of those personal barriers that are perhaps systemically wired, then actually you're able to be more and do more than perhaps you realise. That's it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it kind of emphasizes, I suppose, the importance of maybe women having networks or people or peers that they can talk to about the challenges that they might be facing in that. And I'm interested in, from maybe your perspective, how can we potentially then replicate important networks like Lean In Leeds, or any other peer groups or anything like that in individual businesses? What steps maybe can leaders take to kind of replicate the messages that these networks are sort of talking about?
I think the first is it's understanding there's a problem. Not everybody's aware that there is still an issue for women. Is there an issue for women? That's the wrong way to put it. What do I mean? I mean that there is a difference, and it's a lot of women don't perhaps look at a job description the same way as Amanda. It's very big, gross generalisations, but there's just a lot of truth in it. In my experience, having worked with thousands of women through these programmes and initiatives, there is a difference. And so recognising that there is a difference, and we need to maybe think about, if we're not getting diversity of talent pipeline, is there something we can do about it? And what is the difference, and how do we lean into that? How do we make sure we write job descriptions and person specs that don't lock people out because they're looking at it going, I can't meet 80% of that, as opposed to saying, we don't expect you to do all of these things. Literally be really explicit. I think there's lots of things that we can focus on, but the first thing is just understanding that there is something to be done here, and that something can be done. Not everyone's aware. There's lots of brilliant reports out there. So there's reports based on entrepreneurs, like the Female Founders Forum report that got released last week or last month. There's the Rose Review by NatWest. Some of the recruiters have done some really brilliant reports. There's lots out there if you start looking. I'm sure, guys, if you've got links that you can put at the bottom of this podcast for people to read, is just understand some of these things. And then the next question is, how can we do something about it? But get informed, understand it.
Nice. Great. And then just the final one on that particular point, though, obviously, I know we've talked quite a lot about role models and being, I suppose, inspired by people, or having people that you can really look up to. What advice even can you give to leaders so that they can become really authentic role models and inspire others to not only be successful, but obviously do the right thing?
Oh, that's a big question, Lizzie. So how do I inspire people to be role models and authentic leaders? Is that the question? I think it was.
Yes. Or like, what advice could you give to leaders so that they can be authentic role models?
Okay. What advice? Everybody's a role model. I think this is a funny old thing. I've said this before. You can be 1 year into your job and the new starter next to you looks to you as a role model. I think the first thing is recognising you are a role model. That's the first step. And once you recognise you are a role model, is look to see who you're a role model to, whether you're 1 year into your job or you're a CEO, and every layer in between. And once you recognise who you might be a role model to, is being cognizant of that, and making sure you ask those people what you can do for them. that's the simple question that you ask to be a good role model. What can I do for you? How can I help you? What do you want? Where do you want to get to? Is there anything, I can support you with? Because most of being a good role model is, one, yes, stepping up and doing a good job and, role modelling good behaviour. Let's assume you're doing all of that. That's why you're a role model, right? Let's assume the basics, that you're doing a good job. I'm not going to say the basics. But if you believe you are doing a good job, then, my mum took me to conferences and exhibitions when I was at school, and I used to follow her around as she was going to selling people on stands. I used to go into her office and do loads of photocopying and printing and watch her navigate her way around a company. I did work experience alongside her. When I did my business course, I went into her office and typed it all up. Just being exposed, what can I do for you? How can I help you? That exposure and that learning and understanding a bit more, that's what made the big difference for me. So yeah, who are you role model to, and ask them, how can I help you? What can I do to help you, be whatever success looks like for you, I suppose. I think.
Great.
I think.
Yeah, it's a really good advice, and particularly for someone like myself who've just recently stepped into management, I think these things are really important. But actually, it's interesting to reflect on the fact that you're a role model for you. It doesn't necessarily take you to be in a leadership position to be a role model, to kind of help other people out in the business. And then I suppose, finally, just as my own experience, I guess, as a woman in the industry, in the path I've taken going into management, as I've just said, I've also found it really helpful and inspiring. I've been mentored and managed by another woman and a really successful female in the industry too, who I suppose typically has had to go against the grain a little bit in a typically male dominated environment. Like we said earlier, sales is I suppose commonly perceived as quite male dominated. I guess, what advice could you maybe give to girls or young women who are thinking about embarking on their journey into sales or tech, who might be apprehensive about the gender split?
We need you. Don't be afraid. Because if you start working in the sales industry, there'll be more of you, so the problem will go away. So let's not make that the starting point. Number one. So, someone's got to be the first, and someone's got to break the mold. And I think the more of us that recognise sales as an incredible opportunity to meet lots of people, have great conversations, earn really good money, get to see some of the world. You have a lot of creativity as a salesperson. You get a lot of freedom to operate in your way. And the best sales cultures I know let every salesperson find their way, right? There are sales playbooks, but most good sales organisations, people sell differently based on their strengths and their talents. So listen for those companies that you go to work for that focus on getting the best out of you as an individual, as opposed to slotting you into a very standard kind of framework. How can I bring the best of my skills to the table? So as far as I'm concerned, just go for it, because this is one of the best careers, one of the best professions. It's not boring. It's a lot of fun. There's brilliant people in it. It's great energy, and it's a career with a longevity to it as well. So the good thing about sales is you can start very young and you can have a career till as long as you want, because if you're a good salesperson, you'll never be out of work.
Fantastic. There we go. And if that doesn't get more women into sales, I don't know what will, Zandra. So great. And then finally, just on sticking with, I suppose, the theme of sort of diversity and inclusion, another thing we really wanted to touch on is something that I suppose you talked to us earlier actually about, kind of your interest in it, but regarding actually your own experience with dyslexia. And actually, I was having a bit of a stalk, to be honest, on your LinkedIn earlier, and you put a comment on someone's post who obviously he was talking about his journey. Now owning, I think, like a massive business at the moment, having dyslexia as well. And you commented saying, your dyslexia is almost like your superpower. Going from maybe initially at school having essays falling short in your history exams to now you're running your own business, you're a CEO, you're obviously incredibly successful. And we talked actually in another podcast episode about the importance of leaning into your superpowers, utilizing them as a benefit to make you successful, make you a brilliant salesperson. So talk to us what you meant by actually your dyslexia being your superpower.
So what did I mean by it? So I didn't used to think it was. I used to think it was a pain, to be honest with you, because it just meant I was different. I didn't like being different, and I didn't want special treatment. And when you're a kid, you don't want to be different and stand out. And, you know, why are you being kept back in an exam and given more time when you have to explain yourself? So I hated it as a young person. I also felt that, you know, I couldn't change the fact I couldn't do certain things. It was out of my control, and that was really frustrating. I've never been able to spell. I never will be able to spell. I'm a terrible speller. Thankfully, technology sorted that out for me. But there wasn't much computers around when I first got into industry. So, you know, it did feel like I was held back to start with. So I didn't appreciate it. Now I really do. Why do I think it's a superpower? So my daughter's dyslexic as well, by the way. And there's a lot of neurodiversity in my family, a lot of dyspraxia, autism, and dyslexia. A lot of that in my family. So there's a spectrum thing, and obviously our brains are just wired a bit differently. And that special wiring means that we tend to connect the disconnected, which is a great skill in sales, because you see patterns that other people don't see. You make connections between other people, but people that you don't see. So you tend to do that. You also tend to hover across contexts very well, which means you don't get too into the detail. So you can often see maybe where things are heading or why things are maybe working or not working, because you're able to sort of sit on the top, because you can context switch and jump into lots of different conversations and connect those to have a bigger picture. So that bigger picture thinking, that ability, I think is also part of the sort of dyslexic mindset. And we tend to be quite innovative thinkers. We tend to not think in very kind of what I'd call linear ways. We think in so we can, most people go step by step, and we'll just jump from A to Z and then back to D again, and which can be frustrating in a conversation with us sometimes. But actually, it can be really good if you want to be, it's an entrepreneurial mindset. There's, a higher proportion of entrepreneurs are dyslexic than, any other kind of group, professional group, but a very high level of dyslexic salespeople as well. That's another profession where you find a lot of, and mainly because I think people fall out of education, maybe not doing as well. And Salesforce is one of those sales is one of those professions where there isn't a high bar of education entry point, which I could argue is not necessarily a good thing, by the way. I think we should have better education. It just shouldn't come from the schools. We should put people on really good pathways, after school apprenticeships or whatever that is, that's vocational. It's about role plays, it's about conversational practice, it's about all of the qualities that often, these people with superpowers, these dyslexic brains that are not linear kind of, thinkers that are not maybe as good with the written word, but can be brilliant orators. They tend to make up for it with being really good conversationalists, and that's great for a salesperson. That is really good. So, the schools, let's not expect the schools to chuck out lots of brilliant salespeople. What we should do is make sure people that haven't gone through that school education system as natural linear thinkers, but have got these brilliantly kind of creative brains, are given a vocational onboarding into sales where they can see they can use that in a more effective way. I think it's a super. So anybody that's dyslexic that hasn't found a place for them and doesn't know where they should be, try sales. Really would suggest try sales. It's really just it's played to my strengths. Absolutely played to my strengths. I think my mum's dyslexic too. She's never been diagnosed, but her spelling is as atrocious as mine. So.
No, fair enough. Well, and I really like actually you set out almost a little curriculum of what it would look like for someone who's maybe not following the traditional education route, but like what they could do instead of, or what there should be instead of, to get them into sales. And it's interesting actually, we had someone earlier in the podcast series who talked about how sales should be introduced to education, but perhaps in different ways to what our traditional subjects are like. So yeah, it's interesting to see more and more sales leaders thinking the same, which is great. And I guess just the final one on that one, how did you shift your mindset, or how could you advise someone shift their mindset from maybe being dyslexic and maybe not liking it and thinking of it more as a pain, to then realizing actually almost like realizing the benefits, or how they can kind of play it to their strengths?
It took me having a daughter that got assessed and actually going through the process again with her. And when I went through it, it was very transactional and there wasn't much kind of educational support. When she went through it, there was posters of all these incredibly successful people that were dyslexic over all the walls of the place it went into. And they talked a lot about it as a strength. So I think it's come on a long way. And I just not re-engaged in the subject until my daughter got diagnosed. So I think anybody that is or has been diagnosed recently may be a bit more in tune with the fact that it is a superpower than maybe I was. If they're not, I would strongly encourage them to go and look at some of the resources, of which there are many, by the way, out there these days, because there's a lot of positive, an awful lot of positive content around this subject, and you can, and help to frame your own mind around it. I mean, just read about it now. I'd not even thought about it for years, and now I've think, oh God, maybe that's why I'm good at that. Maybe that's why I'm good at that. That's why that's a strength and a talent, and maybe it all comes from this brain that I've got. So I'd not connected my dyslexic strength with some of my talents, which I have now. Yeah.
Okay, all right, brilliant. Well, no, appreciate the advice on that one. And then obviously, what we'll do, we're coming up towards the end of the podcast now. I probably could have a conversation all day about the issue or the subjects we've just talked about. But just to finish it off with a few broader questions, actually. So this is one very, very broad one. But what is one book or podcast, Zandra, that you would recommend anyone in the sales industry to check out?
Oh, do you know, I love Steve Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. It's just... And I think as a sales leader, because it's often about how people think, make decisions, about their career stories, it really humanises some incredibly impressive, successful people into just the sort of journeys they've gone on, and makes you feel like, okay, maybe I can do that too. Or, you know, to me, I just think it really helps take some of that mystery of success away, which is not a bad thing, and makes people... And I think some brilliant subjects on there, and you can dip into any. You can start at the beginning, start at the end, start in the middle. It doesn't matter. Pick a subject you like, but highly recommend the Diary of a CEO. Really fascinating. And then book. I mentioned Unapologetically Ambitious, and I'm going to say it again because it is the story of a sales leader and a woman of colour, and how she became an incredibly successful CEO in tech. But her book is really, really nice to read, but actually it also shows you that journey, and how if you're a sales leader that has ambitions, then I would recommend that. And if you're a female sales leader with ambitions, definitely read it. Definitely read it. So
amazing. Oh, fantastic. Great book recommendation. And I was just actually thinking we've done our own little Diary of a CEO today, actually, in a bit of a way. So taking one out of Stephen Bartlett's book. But no, some great recommendations there. And then the final one from us then, what needs to be done to change the perception of sales and make it a career of choice?
We need more people like you recording great stuff like this. Very simply, we need more brilliant podcasts curated by people that care about this subject, because it needs sorting out. We will have better economy, better businesses, a more successful society if we have people in the profession that want to be there. And actually, people that want to be there and enjoy it as much as I do, it screams from you, and people buy from people. And if you're loving your job, people will buy from you. And if people buy from you, then the perception of sales will change, and we'll go into a place where people will see sales as a profession to be proud of, because they're witnessing the people that are in it really proud to be in it. And I think we'll change the behaviour of maybe some of those behaviours that are perceived or that still exist will change. So we need people to really want to be in it, because it's a brilliant job. Don't fall into it. Choose it. Choose it.
Fantastic. Zandra, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Zandra.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast. Please subscribe and follow for more. If you like this content, also please check out This Is Prime on all our social media channels, and also Kyle Gallagher and Lizzie Formisano on LinkedIn. See you next time.